Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
You know, we always feature a book of the month, and we have a variety of books. I must say, some we have medical or we have entertainment. But for our September issue, we have something a little bit different. It's called One and the Same, Journey from Mortal to Sorcerer. It's a little interesting title, so you won't know too much about it until we talk to the author, who is Douglas Breeden. And we want to welcome you to our show this morning, Doug.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, well, we're happy to have you also. And I was telling Doug that I have to review a lot of books to figure out which books we're going to, of course, review. And when I picked up Doug's book, The One in the Same, it was not one in the same for me because I had never read a book like this. And the interesting thing, we've been sitting here talking about people who have Asperger's because that was the whole reason, I guess, the book started. So, you know, you are you're like a gentle giant. You're not small, but you certainly have a kind way. And maybe what you should share with people is a little bit about why you wrote the book, and if you could do an elevator speech about what the book is about, that would be wonderful.
I actually wrote the book. I have a blog called Mr. B's Blog where I have a lot of stories and essays, and this started out, was going to be a fictional story in the blog, and it just grew and grew and grew. And at school, one of the other teachers wrote a book, and it kind of inspired me to try one. And it just expanded out. The book is about a young man who finds through a dream that he's actually a sorcerer. And it's the idea, the title One and the Same is the idea that everything comes together in a circle. Or as the sorcerers will say such things as they're the origin and the final product, one and the same. And it details the journey taken first by the young man who has Asperger's, which is a high part of the autism spectrum, and his mentor, who is a retired guy who had been his one-on-one in high school. And they journey through a wonderful world that I guess I created in my mind of what's actually out in the Everglades. And it's not just a swamp, it's like a portal to another world where you can go either all the way up to heaven or all the way down to hell. And they go through and he meets all the creatures of that world. And there's vampires and werewolves and elves, and there's also space aliens and things like that inhabit out in the Everglades. And it's a whole world, and this young man journeys through, and during it, he makes a lot of discoveries about himself and others around him. He becomes aware of all the other people that are different creatures, because everybody gives off like a light or an aura. And for a sorcerer, it's purple. For a vampire, it's black. For a werewolf, it's or a shape changer, it's brown. And as he goes through it, he finds not only is he a sorcerer, but he's one of the four horsemen. And in this, he actually fights a battle with the devil, who in my book is a female, because you have Christ as a male figure, so the opposite would be a female figure. And it's the whole idea that everything is under God, and that she just doesn't like the idea that he elevated man, so she's trying to convince everybody man doesn't belong there. And it ends with him going off to college and going off into a world he understands much more than what he did in the beginning of the book.
Wow. And you see, that's the way the book runs, just the way that Doug Breeden talks. When you get into it, you could be on a street in a local neighborhood, and all of a sudden you're in Egypt or you're somewhere else with very exciting things happening. And I knew I had to meet the author of this book because although it's a small book, I mean, for those of you who are looking for a wonderful read, the book is only a little over 200 pages. But it's one that is fascinating, I must say, and that's why why we chose it to be the book of the month, because it is different. And also on a serious note, though, Doug was and you can explain what you did in schools for people who have Asperger's.
I was what they call a para or one-on-one. What I would do is they would have an Asperger's student, and Asperger's is they have problems with socialization, and they sometimes have trouble fitting in. And what it is they need a little help, and they may need somebody to walk them out when they're upset and calm them down and just kind of move them along and trying to get them to be independent. I worked with a wonderful young man in the high school who, over the course of 3 years, got to the point where he was independent. He's now in college, and I'm sure he's doing very well. And you're there like just an aid to the student and also to the teachers. And it's not a real high paying job, but, and it should be, because they really need to attract more young men, because I believe a lot of these, especially the boys, would work better with a young man, somebody they can relate to a little better. And a lot of it is just showing them that, they're not the only one having these things. And that just kind of sometimes telling them that, the people aren't really talking about them, or what that person said is actually a compliment.
So what I said to Doug, though, which I didn't realize that I know that the school system supports kids who have certain,
yes,
I guess we can call them disabling problems.
Yeah, a one-on-one can work either with behavioral problems or physical ones. My daughter has cerebral palsy in elementary and middle school. She had a one-on-one to help her move around. In high school, she didn't need it. In fact, now she has a master's degree and is in counseling drug addicts. And, and so you have ones working with physical and behavioral, and it's just, it's a helper. You're just like mentoring the kid.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful that you were able to do it. Do all people with Asperger's, women and men, do they all wind up progressing the way Michael did?
Sadly, no. Some don't. Most of them do. The Asperger's kids in high school are just a wonderful group to work with. They come up with some great things. The class that my student was in, these were a bunch of high school kids that would not listen to any music that was not written before 1985. They loved all the old stuff, so I got along great with them. Yet another class, they didn't want to hear anything that was not contemporary. And one of my favorite songs is 17 by Janis Ian. And for many years, people would say, Doug, that song's suicidal. But these kids are like, wow, look at all, and they knew the things that that Janis Ian was trying to express through the song. And they actually looked for that in music.
So they seem very intelligent. That's not everyone, I'm sure, but
yes.
The ones who do have high levels, they're very high, they're very smart. But this is a societal problem, right? People won't give them a chance. Is that what happens?
They have, yes, very often people, because they sometimes have trouble socializing, sometimes they like to be alone, they focus in on things, they sometimes say awkward and embarrassing things. Now, I will give credit to a lot of the kids at the high school I worked with. They were very understanding, but not everybody is.
And isn't there something called Tourette's syndrome? Well, what is
Tourette's?
Tourette's. Now, what is that compared to?
Tourette's is a syndrome where you will just say stuff, and usually very inappropriate stuff, and it just explodes out of you. An Asperger's kid has no filter. I mean, you could be sitting with somebody And you could be going, oh, God, you're such a jerk in your mind. Well, the Asperger kid is likely just to look at the person and go, oh, my God, you're a jerk. And then suddenly, oh, I didn't mean that. Or say something that somebody might find insulting and not realize it. And people will, sometimes they have facial tics, and people will say, what are you making fun of me? And the kid absolutely doesn't know he's doing the stuff. And it's just a matter of people just being kind and taking time to find out that they're, just because they might, just sit by themselves looking into the air doesn't mean that they're, contemplating some horrible act.
Well, I'm going to move forward with Doug Hunt because he's really a history buff. And so for people who, let's say, have family members with Asperger's or want to know more about it, this is a very good book. It's not a medical book, but what it is, it does it through the personality and the human part of this. But One and the Same is the name of the book, Journey from Mortal to Sorcerer. And Douglas Breeden is the author. But he really is a history buff. That's what he loves. That's his whole joy in life. So he shows it in his book because he takes Michael, the character, plus his handler, who we'll call is Jeffrey, right? Alexander, I'm sorry. And I know that so well. I mean, I read this book. So, and they go places. They go wildly places. They go, whether it's, they go across the world, they go up in the sky, they go everywhere. So if you buy the book, you're going to, it's going to shake you up. You're going to have a smile on your face and you're going to say, and then you won't have a smile on your face and say, where did that come from? It's not a religious book, but it just takes someone places they probably don't go by themselves. And I really admire you for this. So what you've done is you've bridged someone with this Asperger's or someone with a autistic problem, and then you've taken them off on this magic carpet everywhere. That's how I saw this. I mean, did you ever think about a magic carpet that just takes you everywhere?
Yeah, it's the idea that it goes into the idea that there's more worlds than what we can see. And the character Alexander takes Michael into the other world because the sorcerers are able to do that. And they meet many of the characters that inhabit the Everglades, which I call the Carpathians of the North America. And he meets vampires, he meets werewolves, he meets creatures of all shapes and sizes. One is called an orc prince, and in fact, I used one of my students' poems that he wrote. It's kind of an anti-hunting poem, but he writes it, and he wrote it, and I worked it into the story as the character Michael gives it to this orc prince who is like a protector of wildlife. And he goes through, they journey all the way down into hell where he meets the devil. He journeys all the way up to heaven where he's finally transformed into a sorcerer. He has a situation where he confronts his fears in that. His fears are in the, image of a huge, terrible looking bear at the bottom of a frozen lake that he has to fight. And in the end, he comes full circle and becomes the person he actually already was, but he didn't realize it. It's the idea that Alexander doesn't make him a sorcerer. He just allows him to become one.
It's interesting that there are no pictures in this book. This is all picture
Right.
of the mind.
Yeah.
But if you had gotten an illustrator, to have put some of those pictures of these creations of yours would have been wild.
I'm sure it would have been.
Do you see all this in your mind?
Oh, yes, I do.
That's why you're able to write this.
Yeah, I can see it all. I publish through Archway, which is a self-publishing group. And if you go to their website, they have different packages that you pay for. And I want to tell you, Archway did everything they said they would do. I really love the company. I would go with them again.
I think it's a good time, though, for us we want people, though, to be able to buy the book. So let's just tell everyone. Now, you're going to hear Doug again. We're going to have him on another radio show. But what I want to just tell you a little bit about it is that you would go ahead and you could go to Amazon.com, put in One in the Same. It's a journey from mortal to sorcerer, but all you have to do is One in the Same with Douglas Breeden, Breeden. You can go to Barnes & Noble also, and they would have the book, and you can go to Books A Million, or you even have your own website, douglasbreeden.com.
Yes.
And I don't even know what the cost of the book is.
The cost, there's a hardcover, which is around $30. That is around $15.
$15 for the soft cover.
And the copies that you could get for the Kindle or the Nook are all under $10.
Okay, and I think you're going to enjoy this book. So anyone listening now and you're a reader and you would like to have something that's very different, if someone says to you, what are you reading? You'd probably say to them, I'm not sure. Really? Because that's how I told Doug that I first picked this book up and he had sent, and I wasn't too sure. But then after I really got into it, I saw this very kind person, Alexander, who was helping Michael, who had Asperger's, but they really were traveling all around the universe. I wouldn't even call it the world. It was the universe. It was everywhere. And you had to really know history to be able to have written it the way you did.
Well, thank you.
I mean, because we went to ancients, and we looked at them.
Yes.
You know, it was...
His journey involves him meeting this other sorcerers. He goes in the book, and what it is the character Melchizedek, who is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. He's mentioned like 3 times. And he is the king of the sorcerers. He meets Solomon, who is the king of Jewish sorcerers, because Michael is Jewish. And Alexander shows him the portals of time where you can actually go back in time, and it's like walking through a hologram movie. Michael actually likes going back to the time of the dinosaurs because he's in love with dinosaurs, and I mean, who isn't? And there in the one scene, he actually meets his grandfather, who actually passed away recently. And then Alexander, who also has some issues to resolve, and they actually go up to what I call the Great Halls, which is in heaven, where you can meet everybody that has passed away. And as he goes through, Michael learns things. He learns that the people around him, there's witches, wizards, vampires, werewolves, and all sorts of things, and ghosts and that what I call the city dwellers, because as we got into cities, humans lost this ability because they stopped using it, and they're stuck in this little secular world and no longer see the multifaceted world they actually live in. And Michael is beginning to experience that, along with the other things that's in the book.
So this actually is fiction,
yes.
But on the other hand, it's taken from real experiences that Doug has had, as I'll call it, a handler, because that's what you said, about people with, Asperger's. Now, the other thing that I wanted to ask you is, were you able to, how did you keep all this, because there's such a variety, did you use yellow stickies? What did you do to keep this all in order?
I have a lot of notes at home, or lists, and I would write down characters' names and that. I would read over. Unfortunately, when I started writing, I never learned to outline, which is something that people do. My outline, as Dr. Lowe at FAU told me, is my draft, which works very well for me, but probably would not work for most people. And it's just a constant rewriting and rereading and going over and over. And a lot of the stuff in there comes from dreams I've had. I have many kinds of dreams. Some are
I'm sure
almost
you do.
night terrors up to, just some, I detailed a couple of them. They're just sometimes very strange dreams. It's just a matter, you write the stuff down, you incorporate it in, you rework it, you reread it. The story to me writes itself. I'll start, when I do a fictional blog, I'll start with an idea that I want the story to go, and it's almost like the story or the characters look up and go, no, this is not where we're going. We're going this route. And it can turn out completely different from what I started. If you go to my blog post, which is Mr. B's blog, it's at WordPress, which is a wonderful blog site. It's free. They leave you alone. They don't care if you post once a year or to once a day or every hour. They just let you alone. I have a lot of fictional stories, some of which I put into a Kindle book called Tales Under the Palms too, which are all the ones. And there is, you can find that in my historical essays, many of which are on the Tudors, who are my favorite kings of England. And it's just
not Tutor. It's not a Tudor. It's the Tudors, right?
Right.
It's the
it's Henry VIII,
right,
and Elizabeth and Edward VI.
There's
and Mary.
There's a wonderful new movie coming out. I think it's either on Elizabeth. She was quite a pistol.
Yes, yeah, and sadly, if you really get into the Tudor history, the movies can be wildly inaccurate, but there is nothing more fascinating or at times unbelievable than the actual historical truth.
I'm sure that's true.
Yeah, this is a family that comes from an affair between the wardrobe manager and the widow of King Henry V, and they go on to become, two of them become two of the greatest rulers in English history, or British, and in fact Queen Elizabeth is one of the most recognizable figures in British history, and yet it's just a strange and fascinating story.
Well, they're human beings,
Oh, yes.
Human beings are strange and fascinating, aren't they? But before we finish with you, I did want to mention that you are he's still keeping track. This, like when you get into this book, you'll see that each chapter is either Michael, or Alexander,
yeah,
which is really interesting because it keeps you straight. But you still have, you still keep up with Michael. See, it took me a while to figure out that you were, you were Alexander in a sense, and there's a Michael.
The actual Michael is a wonderful young man who is now in college on his own, and I would imagine is going on to do some really great things.
So it does show that with some attention, kindness, intelligence, there are people out there with certain disabilities that can be helped, and we can't ignore them. And I'm so proud of Douglas for being that kind of person who was a tutor, Tutor, as well as a friend. And I think what it did for him, though, it probably did as much for you as it did for Michael.
Yes, it does. Because
you have this very sweet way about you, and he hasn't stopped smiling, and it's early in the morning. And he's thrilled with what he did, and I'm sure we're going to see some more writing from Michael. From Douglas. You see, you got me here.
Sorry.
I'm so much into this story, right? And it would be nice, and I know you can't do that, but I'd love to see a picture of Michael to see what he looks like, because now I'm,
he's,
I know what
like
you
I
look
said,
like.
he's a wonderful young man. He actually, in many ways, because in the book I describe the depressions that both of them go through. Some of them were my struggles, and in a way he helped me more than I think I helped him at times. Which
that happens, though, a lot of times when you're helping people.
Yes, it does.
So for those of you who would be interested in buying this, and I think you'd enjoy it, as I said, it's just a little bit more than 200 pages, and it will go very quickly. One and the same, journey from mortal to sorcerer. And for those of you, I know very little about sorcerers, only what I've seen on television. So, you can learn a lot from this book. and it would be fun, but you'd also be learning about Asperger's. You never know who in your family has this, and probably through the way that Douglas wrote the book, you learn a lot in a different way, it seems, because you have great heart and all that. So this is going to be our book of the month coming up in September, and we are going to have it'll be on the cover as well as inside. So we're really glad that you came this morning to share who you are and what you do. And
thank you. It's been just a wonderful experience, and in fact, the time has just flown by.
I know a lot of people say, gee, how can I do this? We still have a little bit more time, so I'm not going to let you go yet. But for those of you who want to buy the book, let me just do that again. You can actually, remember I said it's one in the same, Douglas Breeden, Breeden, and you can go to Amazon.com. You can go to Barnes & Noble. You can go booksamillion.com, or you can just go to douglasbreeden.com. And why don't you give them your blog name again?
My blog is called Mr. B's Blog, and it's the B, it's B''S, and it's on WordPress.com. If you go to my Facebook page or Twitter, usually once or twice a week, I post a link to it. WordPress is a free blog service, and if you want to start blogging, you can do it. You just go in, set up an account, and go away. You will find not just my fictional stories, a lot of the backstories to some of the characters in this book, that in my book Tales Under the Palms. You will also find historical essays on just a bunch of stuff that I just kind of suddenly thought about one day and started writing about.
And I think what I'm going to do is just read a little bit in the back here about the author. I have about a couple of minutes. Douglas Breeden was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He now resides in West Palm Beach. He has a BA in Education and History from Palm Beach Atlantic University and an AS in Funeral Service from Lynn University, as well as a Master's in History from Florida Atlantic University. He is also the author of Mr. B's Blog, we talked about that, at WordPress, and through his love of history and reading, he developed a love of storytelling, which history is famous for. He has written a series of blogs that became his book, Tales Under the Palms 2, a collection of short stories of Palm Beach. He was inspired to write this story from these and may be able to show one why it is often said that all good stories begin a man in Florida.
That's right.
That's funny. Well, thank you. It was wonderful having you here.
It was wonderful being here.
We look forward to having you come again.
Thank you.